Okay, good evening, everybody. And so I'm going to do, I thought we would just have a quick look at section 4, Death by Water. Now, in some ways, this is my favourite section, though it's definitely the shortest in the poem, and you'll be relieved to know that this lecture is going to be reflective of that shortness in the fact that it's the whole section's only 10 lines long. This is the section of the text that took the most editing. It was originally several hundred lines long, and through Eliot's editing and Pound's, it comes down to this final encapsulated 10 lines, which if it, in some ways is contradictory. If the wasteland is a desert, where does water fit into that? Water is supposed to be life-giving. And here, of course, this is the water that we're talking about is the sea. You can't, water everywhere, and all the boards did shrink, water everywhere and not a drop to drink. The sea in all its beauty and mystery and majesty is not necessarily a place that's going to sustain life for an individual. And so we have, again, recurrence of several of this of Eliot's motifs that recur throughout the poem. Lost promise, the promise of water that doesn't actually bring release. Death. This is ultimately this section about the death of Phlebas the Phoenician, and that motif, that recurring motif of the Phoenicians, the Phoenician cities, that civilization that's taken and destroyed. Now, I like this section best because it's just beautiful. The way that it is written, the use of language, its use of cadence and rhythm, and particularly the rhyming couplets, all of these things are excessively lovely. So let's have a quick look at what it says. Since it's only 10 lines, I'll read the whole thing. Phlebas the Phoenician, a fortnight dead, forgot the cry of the gulls and the deep sea swell and the profit and loss. A current under the sea picked his bones in whispers as he rose and fell. He passed the stages of his age and youth, entering the whirlpool. Gentile or Jew, O you who turn the wheel and look to windward, consider Phlebas, who was once handsome and tall as you. Now, this is about death. Ultimately, it's about the death of everybody. Phlebas' fate is to remind us all of our own mortality. And it is not death that moves into something else. It's not death that is redemption. It's not even death that's disappearing into hell. Phlebas disappears into the whirlpool of memory. His death is ultimately meaningless, and his life, as is his life, whatever he desired, he doesn't get. Phlebas is just dead. And we hear the echoes of his voice. Remember me. So he becomes the drowned Phoenician sailor. This drowned man that we see recurring as a motif throughout the poem returns here in its final inexorable finality. Human life has an ending, and that ending isn't actually going to provide us with necessarily any meaning. Even if there is meaning to death, even if there is life after death, even if there is a soul, it is something that's completely beyond us. Sucked into the whirlpool, something that we cannot escape from. We are all headed towards our ending. Structurally, this is a very formal section. It's perhaps the most traditionally structured in its lyric, but even there you have the breakup in the way that the lines are actually structured, with a current under the sea and Gentile or Jew actually sitting away from the traditional structure of the rhyming couplet. And in fact, those lines, a current under the sea and Gentile and Jew, in a normal piece of poetry would actually make this into an octave. And you would have profit and loss and current under the sea would actually fit within the previous line, and then you would run on with enjambment, and you'd have your 4 lines of, you would have your 8-line octave with rhyming, with its rhyming pattern, that would actually work constructively. So you would have a sense of regularity in this piece that then Eliot just deliberately decides to break up by movement of the lines. But the way the language is constructed, it has that rhythmic movement of the sea and the use of the very soft vowel sounds, particularly in the opening lines. Phlebas the Phoenician, a fortnight dead. forgot the cry of the gulls and the deep sea swell. So we have the softness of those with the swell and the sea and the soft Fs. It gives it this really delicate feeling, and the long vowel sounds that are associated with those soft consonants gives you then this really long, slow, but distinct rhythm. That is echoing the movement of the ocean. So you have within the rhyme an echo of the setting, which is a really clever piece of construction there. Now, profit and loss, of course, are the things that we've just looked at from the previous stanza, the obsession of the modern age, that those things become the most important things in life. That is how our worth is measured in what we actually make, where we stand in the great money-making machine that is the modern world, whether we make any profit or loss, whether we've been successful monetarily. That is the theme that Eliot sees, and a lot of modernist writers see as actually being the measure of the age. But this is a direct negation of that. Ultimately, Eliot in this section points out that those desires are worthless and transient, that it doesn't matter how much we think about of profit and loss. And it may be another reason that the image of the Phoenician is such an important motif within the text, particularly as the Phoenicians were the great first sort of mercantilist trading empire. They existed to buy and sell in the same way that the modern world seems to exist to buy and sell. And in this, we have that negation of that. And the reiteration, of course, that we are all mortal, that we can't control anything, and that our lives are ultimately perhaps meaningless. We live them regardless of where we go, regardless of our hopes. O you who turn the face windward. And the universality of this message is actually echoed in that biblical phrase, Gentile or Jew, because you're either Jewish or you're Gentile, which basically means that this warning is to encompass the entire world. Once I was young and handsome, I was tall and handsome, I had dreams, I looked for the things of the world, and all of that ended up in death and my sightless, eyeless skull being run around the currents underneath the ocean, and my flesh picked off my bones. And this, again, this motif of the skull that recurs as this ominous image and reminder of death. So there's quite a lot. In some ways, this encapsulates a lot of the messages in the text about barrenness of hopes. It's about mortality. It's about the modern world and its failings, are encapsulated in 10 intensely beautiful lines. And then, of course, we move on to the final section where we have all of the ideas in the text actually summed up together. And we have the resolution that the wasteland is actually promising, not necessarily a resolution that we want in What the Thunder Said, but a resolution nonetheless. And we'll look at that in the final lecture. So good night.